Greetings to you on this midweek Lenten devotion from Divine Redeemer Lutheran Church. If you're looking at me and you're thinking, oh no, I got the wrong guy, well, I'm Pastor Rand. I'm also on staff here. I'm Pastor Emeritus, and I'll be doing the Wednesday night services, and you'll see me around doing Bible studies and things like that. This week we're looking at the story of what happened during the Exodus of the people from the Israelites all the way over and the Egyptians and how they merged over to the new land. In the 10th chapter, when we look at what's going on in this, the 9th plague that were brought upon the people, we're going to look at what darkness really is and what is light. And usually when there's darkness used in the Bible, it's always compared with light. But as we look at these different plagues that were brought on Egypt, we got to remember what was the purpose. Then that's something we're going to be looking at. But let's look at, first of all, the other plagues that came. We know that there were 10 of them, and today we're talking about the 9th one. But the first 8 ones was when the Nile was turned to blood, the frogs, the dust became gnats, and then the flies, the death of the Egyptian livestock, which I'm going to be mentioning tonight, and also the boils that were on the people, both the Israelites and on the Egyptians, hail and the locusts. Well, the boils were only on those who weren't listening. But let's think about this. Last week we talked about what was going on the hand of God, and this week we're going to switch and look at what God is dealing with darkness. I don't know if any of you have ever seen darkness. Remember that darkness is the absence of light. And so when we think about darkness, we think about things being totally gone. Total darkness looks maybe a little bit like this. Now, I didn't go away, but I want you to just kind of close your eyes too. Okay, open your eyes and think about what that was like to not be able to see and hear. And that's what we're going to be talking about, because when God caused the darkness to come upon the land there in Egypt, it was total 100% darkness. You couldn't see your hand in front of your eyes. We read in Exodus that the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the heavens that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt." Can you imagine being so dark that you can feel that darkness and understand that it is absolutely gone? There was no way to get around that darkness. They couldn't light a lantern. They didn't have cell phones to turn on and pop. They didn't have any way to show that there were light. Now, this darkness that we're talking about was so complete that the people didn't move out of their houses. They stayed put. They were terrified because they could not see anything. And again, that was only in the land of Egypt. This happened so that the Lord would let the people know that He was the light, and that without God, there is nothing but darkness. And we kind of forget that. But the Bible makes a distinction between darkness and lightness, a distinction between what was going to be and was not going to be. When we think about that, that's what the Lord did in these plagues. The plagues came upon the people of Egypt, and the Israelites were not affected by those plagues unless they didn't listen to what God had told them. And so they did. Now look at verse 9, if you back up a little bit, of Exodus. Exodus 9, it says, "But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing of all that belongs to the people of Israel shall die." So that nothing that belongs to the people of Israel. So the Lord was showing His light upon the Israelites and His darkness upon the people who were there. It's the Egyptians. And they were trying to say that everything was going to be okay. And we know that's not true. Without God, things are not okay. And so they look and they tried that, and no matter what happens, the Pharaoh kept hardening his heart. Now you have to remember that the Pharaoh was the stepbrother to Moses, and they knew each other very well. They grew up together. They understood each other. And because the Pharaoh was actually younger than Moses, then the Pharaoh kind of looked to Moses for guidance before all of this happened. But there was confusion, and there was a time where he became like God. As a matter of fact, the darkness shows what life is like. The Pharaoh believed in a god called Re, who was the god of light. And that really wasn't a god. There's also a god called Horus, and there's also a god called Nut. Now, Nut is a good name for a god today, for a non-god. But they would have been horrified by these darkness because they were the light and power, and they were the ones that the people would turn to even though they were false gods. And so God shows in this darkness that the people who do not follow God are in darkness. That's what we're going to learn about this week. We're going to think about that. And we need to remember that the darkness is sometimes even in us. When we know what we should do and we don't do it, we become dark. But we have an eternal light, and we need to remember that light is always there. And when we turn dark, we're not staying dark forever. Remember, Jesus came into the darkness of our sin, into the darkness of the world, because Jesus is the light of the world. In 2 Corinthians, we read, the 4th chapter, beginning at verse 5, "For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves and as your servants, for the sake of Jesus. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." And that's what this devotion is about, that God understands darkness. And he understands that the people who don't follow his words are in darkness. But he didn't want us to stay that way. He wanted us to live in the light, and the light is Jesus. And that's what the whole stories are all about, that the people who follow God have a lightness, and they understand that Jesus is the light. He's the light of the world. And that is the devotion for this, the last Wednesday, when we pass over into the new era, when we go from darkness, pass over into light, when we go from Lent and pass over into Easter. May God bless you and be with you. Amen.